Okay, now I'm going to lay out the spirals on my silk chiffon scarf. I have a scarf here which is started out as 90 by 11. I get them from Dharma Trading. I dyed it black. I use an irregular dye technique, so I get all these mottled colors on purpose. Once I've dyed it, it's not 90 by 11 anymore, but it's still pretty big. So I have it stretched out on the table, and I'm just going to lay out my spirals. I want to do 2 scarves, so I'm dividing my spirals in half. And I also want to do both sides of each one, so I'm actually dividing my spirals into 4 piles, which is what's up here on the table. So I do 3 piles, and then a pile for this side of my scarf. And each spiral is cut tight, but I open it up when I lay it out, and I'll start at one end and work my way towards the middle. I like placing them offset from each other on each side, but it also looks nice if you match them, depending on whether you like the look of the back of the felt piece or not. Sometimes I'll just distribute them by putting, one on each end and one in the middle, and then filling in the gaps that way too. But all I'm doing is laying these out like this, and once I get it filled in, I'll flip the whole thing over and I will fill in the other side. I'm also going to use my little bits and snips, the small pieces that came off the corners of my spirals, and I'm going to intersperse those in between in my empty spaces to kind of fill things in visually. So I'll get another shot when I get done laying it all out. I also take little wisps of individual wool fibers and cover it with individual wisps. I'm going to show that here in a minute too. Okay, now I have all my spirals and all my little triangles laid out on one side of my scarf. Just for a little extra insurance and a little more color interest, I take a little bit of the unfelted wool. This is merino roving. I have a little bit of gray and a little bit of black. And I'm just going to lay the finest of wisps across, especially the edges of the larger pieces of my pre-felt. So I'm going to just pull off very thin, you can just barely see a little wisp there, and lay it across the edges of a lot of the pre-felts, and that will help everything stick and, like I said, get a little more texture and color interest in my final piece. Once I'm done with that, I'll lay another piece of my rug padding fabric on top of make a sandwich, and then flip the whole sandwich over. If I have an extra pair of hands around, I'll probably use them, but otherwise I'll do it by myself, flip the whole thing over, and I'll repeat the same process on the other side of the scarf. And I'm going to stagger my spirals so that the spiral on one side is not going to line up with the spiral on the other side. But like I said, you can choose if you want to line your spirals up on both sides, and it just gives you a little different effect. Okay, I've laid out both sides of my scarf. It's hard to see on the camera, but this is, there's another layer underneath the scarf that looks a lot like this one. I'm going to put little tiny amounts of dish soap on the scarf all over. Just tiny, thin squiggles. That's probably going to be more than enough. And then I have hot water. What I use is a tray from the auto supply store. It's an oil drip tray. And then I have a piece of corrugated ridged floor runner for like hallways to put over your carpet. That's what I have in here, this black thing that's in there. So just to keep the water off the floor, I'm going to work in the tray. And then as I roll it up, I can move the tray into the middle of the table and work on it. But I kind of extend my table by putting my tray out off the end. So the table stops here and the tray just keeps going. And that gives me a longer table than I normally have to work on, which is kind of nice. So I'll start by putting the other piece of rug matting on here. And this is just the rug under laminate that you put under an area rug that's supposed to pad it and keep it from slipping. You can also use bubble wrap, which you'll see a lot of people do. I use both, but I'm kind of leaning toward this these days just because it's easier to handle big pieces. So now I have my felt sandwiched in between 2 layers, and since I'm not working on a sink area, I don't have a sprayer, but this works pretty well too. And this is just, you know, hot tap water. I don't use a stick or a pool noodle or anything inside. When I roll this up, I just roll it up and very gently squish it. The other nice thing about the rug underlayment is that the water sort of distributes itself, and I can just water the outside and it'll soak through. So if I don't get it as wet as I meant to, it's not as big a deal as with the bubble wrap. And now I can move this in the middle. There we go. This thing's a little easier.